Okay ji, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome to another lecture of Modern Control Systems. I am your presenter Muhammad Rafi Chughtai. So let's start our lecture. So today we will have a brief discussion about the response of the system, steady state response of the system, steady state error, stability in state space, and other interesting topics which you can see in the description of this video. So first of all, first thing first, let's discuss what is stability. This is a very short or a very brief concept. Stability in state space. Okay, how can you find the stability when the transfer function is given? And another question is how can you find the stability when state equations are given? So when you have a transfer function, how can you find stability? And when you have state equations, how can you find stability? It's very simple basically. In case of transfer functions, you have something transfer function t of s, let's suppose, is equal to numerator over denominator. N of n, let's say n of n numerator over denominator. So uh, when you take roots of the roots of the denominator gives you poles. This is what we have already discussed. I am only reviving the concept. So if you plot those poles, for example, if the poles are s is equal to -1 or s is equal to -2, these are the poles which is -1 and -2. If these two poles lie in your left half plane of your s domain, this is s, this is j omega. If the poles lie in the left half plane, then you can say that the system under discussion is a stable system. Now you already know that these poles or these roots depends upon the denominator, and this denominator obviously has a term which we know as zeta or omega n. So and omega n. So zeta is the damping ratio. So if your damping ratio is changed, your location of pole is changed. So if by any value of the damping ratio the poles remain in the left half plane, then you can say that your system remains stable. And if for any value of your damping ratio poles move to this right half side, then you can say your system is unstable. So this is the stability. In this way you can find the stability when your transfer function is given. How can we find the stability if we are given with a B, C and D, that is state matrices. In this case, as we discussed in the last lecture, we discussed about eigenvalues. Eigenvalues. We evaluated eigenvalues and then we solved an example in the last lecture. So eigenvalues are basically Si minus a determinant. So determinant of Si minus A, where A is the matrix, S is S and I is the identity matrix. Obviously S minus A is not possible, so we make this S a matrix by multiplying it with the identity matrix. So this Si minus A gives you a matrix, taking its determinant gives you an equation which when solved can give you the eigenvalues. So these eigenvalues, obviously, if you find if you find the roots of some system with transfer function, let's suppose a, and then you move that system to a state space and then find eigenvalues, these will be same. So For same system, the eigenvalues from the state equation and roots or poles from the uh, transfer function are same. If you have s is equal to -1 and s is equal to -2 poles or roots from transfer function, then your eigenvalue from si minus a would be s is equal to -1 and s is equal to -2. So in this way you can again go to the uh, S plane and can see if these values lie in left half plane. If these values are on the left half plane, then we can say that our system is stable. If any of this value comes to the right hand side of the plane, then we can say that our system is now unstable. So this was the very brief concept about stability. So next topic that I will be going to discuss would be a steady state error. Let me use another color of pen. So let's now discuss about steady state error. If I give you a brief intro of this steady state error, it would be like in the last lecture we discussed about error of a signal. We discussed error for open loop and we discussed error for closed loop system. Steady state error is the error of the system when time approaches infinity, or you can say that when your system is settled down, or when your system have achieved its final value. And then if there is a difference between input and output, sorry, if there is a difference between reference signal and actual output, then you can say that your system has a steady state error. So this error is same as that of earlier that we discussed in the last lecture. All the expressions and everything would be same except the time. The time that we will take for a steady state error would, would be t equals infinity. We will see the same error at t is equal to infinity. We will see that same error when your system is settled down and when it has achieved its final value. If you remember that during our introduction lectures, we discussed that response of the system is something like this, where this is your reference signal. So this difference is the steady state error. ESS, SS for steady state, and E is for error. So this difference between the settled output and the reference output gives you a steady state error. So once we have established that what is a steady state error, let's now discuss how to find this steady state errors. For that, I would like to introduce another term, which is a test input. Test input. This term is actually very important when you are going to evaluate the performance of a system, because every system is designed for its own circumstances. Every system is designed for its own purpose, for its own type of input. For example, there are systems which are designed for constant acceleration. There are systems which are designed for constant speed. Similarly, if let's suppose if there is a missile going off from the earth, then obviously it requires a constant acceleration, and if there is satellite orbiting the earth, it requires constant velocity. So there are different types of systems. If you are driving a car and your car is somehow designed for at some circumstances it is for constant speed, at another it is for constant accelerations. System Whatever the system is, whatever the characteristics of the system is, they vary when the output of that system varies when input varies. If your spring mass spring system is designed for some constant input, and if you give it an increasing input, then obviously the performance would not be the same. So if you want to measure the performance of any system, then in the first place you have to give that system the correct test input. That test input which matches the required or the actual input that that system will have when it would be operational. So there are few systems, or you can say that any system uh, can have different steady state errors with different test inputs. If a system is designed for a step input and you give it a ramp input, it will give you a large steady state error. And that same system will give you kind of a minimum steady state error when you give it a step input as a test input. So normally there are three types of test inputs. One is, you can say, is a step input. Sorry. One is a step input which can be used as a test input. Another input that we have as a test input is the ramp input, and another input that we can use as a test signal is parabola. The step input can be drawn as like this, a straight line. Let me draw all of these. The ramp input can be drawn like this, and the parabola can be drawn like this. Mm, this can be this can denote physically a constant position. This can denote a constant velocity. Physically, you can interpret it as a constant velocity, and this we can interpret as constant acceleration. So if there is a system which involves constant position, then you can use step input as a test input. If there is a system which involves constant velocity, then you can use ramp input as a test input. Similarly, if your system involves constant acceleration, then you can use parabola as your test input. And the Laplace for, you already know, step is 1 over s. The Laplace for ramp input is 1 over s square, and the Laplace for parabola is 1 over s cube. This is S domain notations for all these test inputs. And time domain interpretation, this can be interpreted as 1, this is t, and this is 1 over 2t square. So these three inputs, ramp, ramp, and parabola, can be used as a test input for any system. If that system is designed for a step input, then giving this step input as a test signal will give you minimum steady state error. However, if the system is designed for step input and you are giving it ramp as a test signal, then obviously the steady state error will increase. And if the system is designed for ramp and you are giving test signal is also ramp, then obviously the system will have minimum steady state error. Tracking a satellite is one of the example where you have to use the correct test input. By the way, these three test inputs all are applicable to stable systems only. So first you have to establish that your system on which you are applying these test inputs is stable. And how will you check that those systems are stable? By one of these methods, either by transfer function or by either with the help of state equations. So let's evaluate steady state errors for uh, for some of our systems. By the way, what can be the cause of steady state error? If, for example, um, if you set your cruise control of your car at 120, and if it is going on 119, then this 1 kilometer per hour is the steady state error of your car. So practically, ideally, it shouldn't be there. So what cause, what is the basically, what basically is the cause which due to which steady state error arises? So there are actually many causes. You can say that non-linear sources is one of the cause of steady state error, or another example you can say that when, oh yes, the motor, the backlash or play in the motors, backlash or play in the motor, or you can say in a steering, which in a car steering, or is a source of steady state error. And if input voltage, if you are designing an electrical system and input voltage exceeds some specific threshold level, then obviously it will introduce a steady state. It can distort the system. Uh, it can introduce spikes into the system, and obviously everything will result in a steady state error. The performance of the system is, whenever the performance of the system is degraded, then the steady state error come into place. Whenever there is some problem is the system in the system, it will not give the required output. So whenever the system is not able to give you the required output, then obviously it is due to the fact that it has a steady state error in it. Now, earlier, for open loop, the expression for the error that we evaluated in the last lecture was E naught of S is equal to R of S minus Y of S is equal to 1 minus G of S into R of S. Let's see, 1 minus G of S into R of S. This was the error equation that we derived for open loop system. R of S, G of S minus 1, or what have we written over here? 1 minus G of S, R of S, R of S minus Y of S. So for closed loop system, it's actually the same. For a closed loop system, we evaluated it as R of S over 1 plus G of S. Let's see. Closed loop system errors, expression for the error for closed loop system. 1 plus G of S H of S into R of S. Yes, for unity feedback it was 1 plus G of S. Yes, this is the expression. 1 over 1 plus G of S into R of S. Error of a feedback closed loop control system for a unity feedback. This is R of S 1 over 1 plus G of S. So this is the same that we have written over here. R of S over 1 plus G of S. So these were the error signals. Now step input, for step input, steady state error of open loop will be is equal to 1 minus g of s, and in place of r of s I am going to write 1 over s. Now to find the steady state error, what we should do? Obviously the steady state error means at time t is equal to infinity. If you remember, we discussed something called as final value theorem. If you remember from last lectures, from previous lectures, we discussed that if you have something which is x of t, which can be represented in Laplace domain as x of s, then in order to find x of infinity, you can find x of 0. Means t approaches infinity in time domain is equal to s approaches 0 multiplied by s in s domain. If formally I write the equation for final value theorem, which I already have written in the previous lectures, was limit t approaches infinity, x of t is equal to limit s approaches 0 s into x of s. This is what I have applied over here. So putting s is equal to 0 and then multiplying with s, you would have E open loop steady state error open loop infinity is equal to limit s approaches 0 s into 1 over s into 1 minus g of s, 1 over s into 1 minus g of s. So this s is cancelled with this. So open loop steady state error would be equal to 1 minus g of 0. Similarly, we can find closed loop error would be equal to limit s approaches 0 s into what is it, s into this one, sorry, s into this one, 1 over 1 plus g of s, 1 over 1 plus g of s into r of s. What is r of s over here? R of s is 1 over s for step input. So again, this s is cancelled with this s. Closed loop steady state error expression for steady state error of closed loop system is 1 over 1 plus g of 0. This is steady state error for open loop. This is steady state error for a closed loop system. Okay, now let's apply these formulas on some practical system. Let me draw a system. For example, I have R of S plus, and then I have a negative feedback over here. This is the error signal E of S, and I have G of S as 100 into S plus 2 into S plus 6 divide by S into S plus 3 into S plus 4, then output Y of S. Then I have a unity feedback loop over here. So steady state error for step input for this typical system steady state error for step input would be 1 over 1 plus g of 0. This, yes. which is, what is g of 0? Put s is equal to 0 in this expression. This term will become s plus 2, 0 plus 2, 2. This term will become 0 plus 6, 6. Oh, due to this 0, everything will become infinity. So it is 1 over 0. This is 0, 0, 0, 100. Basically, it would be 100 into 2 into 6 divided by 0 into 3 into 4, which is equal to obviously infinity. Sorry, if g of 0 is infinity, this is g of 0, by the way. This is g of 0. So the steady state error would be 1 over 1 plus infinity equal to 1 over infinity is equal to 0. Steady state error is 0. There is no error. It means designed, your system is designed for a step input. So your steady state error is 0. Now if I apply ramp to the same system, what would happen? Expression for ramp would be limit s approaches 0 s into 1 over 1 plus g of s. Here r of s is 1 over s square. Due to ramp, r of s is 1 over s square. This s is cancelled with this. Then we have steady state error would be limit s approaches 0, 1 over s plus s g of s. So what would be s g of s? S g of s would be 100 into s plus 2 into s plus 6 divided by s into s plus 3 into s plus 4 multiply by s. This is g of s, this is g of s, and this is s. This s is cancelled with this. So s g of s is 100 into s plus 2 into s plus 6 divided by s plus 3 into s plus 4. So how to find steady state error? Limit s approaches 0, 1 over s into s g s. This is already found. So limit s approaches 0, 1 over s plus sgs. Put s 0, 0 plus, put s is equal to 0 in this sgs. It would be 100 multiply by 2, 100 multiply by 2 multiply by 6 divided by 3 divided by 4. So this is 6 multiplied by 2, 12. This is 4 multiplied by 3, 12. So 12 over 12 cancelled. So overall steady state error would be 1 over 100. So for what conclusion we have over here is that for a same system, when we applied step input as a test input, then the steady state error was 0. And when for the same system we applied a ramp input, the steady state error was 1 over 100. So from here we can conclude that the application of correct test input is essential and very necessary in order to find a steady state error or in order to calculate the performance of a system. So I will conclude this point on this remark. I will conclude this steady state error topic on this remark. So the next thing that we are going to discuss is performance of a feedback control system. Okay, for this specific topic, let me change the color of my marker. Okay, the performance of a feedback control system. So guys, performance is actually a relative term. This specific word performance, what happened to the pen? So this specific word performance is a very relative term. For example, if there is a student among you who is a very good player of cricket and who is not good in studies. So if uh, chairman asks from a teacher, how is the performance of the student? Obviously, the teacher would say that he is not a good performer. However, if the chairman asks someone in the ground or a referee that how is the performance of the student, obviously the person on ground will say that uh, he's a magnificent player and he's a well performer. So the person is same and reviews about him are contradictory. For a person on the field, the performance is what he scores in the match, whereas the person in the classroom, the performance for him is the marks in the quiz, or the marks in the exams, or the contribution in the classroom. So the performance for these two performance criteria for these two people for the same student are different. Similarly, if you say that what is the performance of a system, then obviously you have to define what actually a performance is. And that performance obviously will vary under different circumstances. For one system, uh, reaching some point is important, and for another system, reaching that point in minimum time is important. So, reaching some goal and reaching the goal in uh, you can say in a constrained time are two different scenarios. If you turn on the fan, one can say that if the fan is moving in the required, if a fan achieves its required speed in lesser time, then it has a good performance. However, there is another person who says that whatever time it takes to reach the required speed, it should match the ideal speed of the fan that it is designed for. So these two people are looking at different parameters, and these two people have different criteria for the performance of a system. So to define the performance of a system, we must have something at hand, we must have some criteria at hand which should be a measurable criteria which we should see. For example, the performance of a student in the class is measurable with the help of grades, and the performance of a student in field is measurable with the help of the score he makes. So the performance should be in terms of some variable or in terms of some criteria. In industry, when we say that which plant is bigger, then the answer is not in the size. You cannot say that uh, uh, fertilizer plant A is bigger than a oil field B. You cannot conclude it because the size of the system, the size of an industry depends upon the number of IOs, number of input outputs. How many inputs are there, how many outputs are there, how many digital inputs are there, how many digital outputs, analog input, analog outputs are there. So the size is the you can say the bigger plant is not whose size is bigger. The bigger plant is the one which has larger number of IOs to be controlled. So similarly for the systems we have multiple type of performance criteria. Earlier, I gave you a brief introduction of the performance of a system in my first or second lecture. That, for example, if I have a system and whose response time response is like this, then there is a time in this is the time it takes to reach a certain level, and these are the ripples or overshoots. So these are kind of hints that I gave you about the performance of the system, how it can be measured, uh, which parameters we should see to measure a performance of a system. Obviously, the person that we just discussed, if he is a good performer in a class, then obviously he would not be that good on field. So there is always a compromise. And if he is a very good performer in field and is not giving proper time to his classes or his studies, then obviously he will not be a good performer in studies. So there is always a trade-off, and we have to keep a balance. Uh, Similarly, in the systems, obviously, same applies here over as well. Uh, there are few parameters which are degraded when some other parameter is improved. So you have to take a wise decision that which is your required parameter. If you want to achieve something quickly, then your parameter should be time. If you want to achieve something irrelevant of time, but the precision is the goal, then obviously steady state error, reduction of steady state error is your goal. That is your parameter which you are looking at, no matter if it achieves that value in a larger amount of time. That is of no concern to you. It is not the performance parameter for you at the moment. The performance parameter for you is that it should have smallest steady state error. So the performance that we will discuss would be performance of a performance of a second order system. All the expression that we will write today would be for a second order system, would be the performance criteria for a second order system. Let's do some uh, intro mathematics, uh, just to show you from where all these formulas that we will derive would be coming, and then we will not obviously derive all the formulas. I will write directly and then we will apply. So just to give you a brief introduction, let's say this is your some system. This is y of s, negative feedback, and this g of s is, let's suppose it is, you can say k some parameter k over s into s plus p, some g of s. So I can write its output as y of s is equal to, for a feedback system, I have y of s is equal to g of s over 1 plus g of s into h of s, that you already know, multiply by r of s, where r of s is the input. So for this specific system, it would be k, you can put this k over s into s plus p in place of g of s, and it will turn out to be k over s square plus ps plus k into r of s. Now this k can be different, and this r of s can be different in case of different test inputs, or in case of step, ramp, or parabolic inputs. So comparing, if we compare this equation with our standard equation, which was a square plus 2 zeta omega ns plus omega n square, that was the standard equation for a second order system. Here I can see that omega n square is equal to k. because here we have k, here we have omega n square, so omega n square is equal to k. So I can write this equation as omega n square. In place of k I can write omega n square plus s square plus 2 zeta omega n s plus omega n square, where 2 zeta omega ns is equal to p and omega n square is equal to k. And for step input, r of s would be 1 over s. Rather, I can write performance of a second order system for step input. So all the formulas, this is important, that all the formulas that we will write over here would apply it only to a second order system which have a step input. So solving this, taking inverse Laplace transform from, you can see the table of your textbook. I think it is table 2.3. You can check, from the book, from the Doff's book. I think it's table 2.3 where inverse Laplace transforms are given. So from there I have y of t would be equal to 1 minus 1 over beta e raised to the power minus zeta omega nt. You don't need to memorize it. Just I am giving you the introduction that from this expression everything is derived. You should know that I wrote 1 over s over here before deriving all the formulas. So from this you should know that this is for a step input system, and from this you should know that this is for a second order system. So just the purpose of writing these equation is that the complete formulas that we will uh, evaluate, or that are being derived, came from this assumption that we have taken a second order system and we applied a step input to that second order system, and that we had this equation. We applied inverse Laplace to this equation and then we came out with this equation, sine omega n beta t plus theta, where beta is equal to under root 1 minus zeta square. Because you see there is no beta over here, then from where this originates. So this beta is basically 1 minus zeta square. They have written 1 minus zeta square as beta, some variable. So this is the you can say the basic maths behind all the uh, formulas that we are going to write. So from this basic maths you should know that first of all that this y of t response of a system, and then this maths is done for a second order system and for a step input response. Okay, now let's draw a bigger picture in order to identify that what is what. I can write this as y of t. I can write this as this is basically time. So the output of a system is okay, and this we can say a reference signal. This is a reference signal, then okay, this can be a band. in which this reference signal for a unit step I can write it as 1. Okay. So this is an overshoot, and this is a rise time. So the rise time is, you can say, that amount of time that a system takes in moving its output from around 10% to 90% of its final value. This can, you can say that this is a 10% of the actual final value, required final value, and this point is 90% of the value that is required. So, or in other words, if this is 1, then going from point 1 to point 9, going from point 1 to point 9, the amount of time it will take in moving from point 1 to point 9 is called a rise time. Uh, this can be point 0.9 as well. Anyways, this is the rise time and this is peak time. By the way, there are two types of rise times. One rise time is called as the swiftness, which the rise time I mentioned over here is the swiftness of the system. Is the swiftness of the uh, you can say system, the swiftness of the system response. This is, I can write it as TR1, and from here I am sketching another line. This is the line from origin to here. This is TR, which is the normally the standard rise time that we discuss. So this TR1 is actually the swiftness, and this TR1 is the swiftness of the response point 1 to point 9, and this TR is from 0 to uh, uh, achieving the almost achieving the final value. It is the rise time, and the peak time is the time it takes to reach the peak, and the settling time, I can say, where is the settling time, or you can say at this point system is settled. So this is the settling time. By definition, settling time is the point where the system uh, achieves the value which is 2% of the final value. So the difference between the actual and the final value remains only 2%. Then the time that is being taken is called as the settling time. So peak, or you can say the percentage overshoot is basically MPT minus FV divided by FV, where MPT is equal to peak value of time response and FV is final value of time response. So MPT is the peak value, which is this, and final value is this. So MPT minus FV over FV is the percentage overshoot. So after percentage overshoot, let's discuss the settling time. I have already told you that settling time is when the difference between the desired the final value and the uh, value of the response remains 2%, then we can say the system is settled. Someone might say that he considers the system settled when it comes within 5% of the final value. It depends. So we will see that if someone asks that it should be around 5% difference, then we have to apply different formula. For 2%, we have to apply the different formula. Where would that different difference will make? Let's discuss that. Mm, let's plug out this term. For 2%, it means e raised to the power minus zeta omega n t as the settling time should be less than 0.02. It when someone considers that if the system time response value is within 2% of the final value, then you will write 0.02 over here. If someone says that it should be 5%, then you should change it to 0.05. So taking log, we have zeta omega n ts is equal to 4, ts settling time is equal to 4 over zeta omega ns. So this is the expression for settling time. Similarly, for other parameters, I will write directly those equations. Tp means peak time is equal to pi over, we will not go into the derivations, pi over omega n into 1 minus zeta square. So just imagine if you are given with the characteristic equation, you can find the zeta and omega n by comparing that characteristic equation with our standard equation, and after putting those values of omega n and zeta you can find the peak time. Similarly, peak value MPT, maximum value, can be found from the formula 1 plus e raised to the power minus zeta pi divided by 1 minus zeta square. And by substituting this MPT value over here, I can uh, write percentage overshoot as 100 into e raised to the power minus zeta pi divided by 1 minus zeta square. So if you are given with a characteristic equation, you can find zeta and omega n from that characteristic equation and put those values in these equations to find your peak time, MPT, percentage overshoot, and obviously the swiftness TR1, which is equal to 2.16 zeta plus zero point 0.6 divided by omega n. I am directly writing these equations from your textbook without going to the derivations, so you can verify these formulas from textbook as well. What you actually need to calculate all these parameters is zeta and omega n. So conclusion that I would like to make at this point is, if you are given with a of a characteristic equation of a second order system, you compare it with a standard second order equation, which is s square plus 2 zeta omega ns plus omega n square. You compare that characteristic equation of second order system with this, find zeta and omega n by comparison, and then put in the expressions to find all the performance parameters of that specific system. Now to change the performance parameter, if you want that your rise time is okay, no problem, it can rise late, but your peak overshoot should be less, then you can change the zeta, you can change the omega n. How can you change the zeta and omega n? If you remember, in case of mass spring system, zeta was, I don't remember actually. It depended. It was. It depends actually on K, M, and B. Zeta and omega n were dependent on K, M, and B, where K was spring constant, M was mass, and B was uh, frictional constant. So by changing these values, by changing different spring, by changing different mass, by changing different friction, or by reducing the friction, or by oiling or something, you can change your zeta. If you are changing your zeta, you are changing your performance parameters. You can make your system rise in lesser time. You can reduce your peak overshoots of the system by using bigger or smaller mass, by using different spring. So how can you say that one spring A is better than spring B? Only because when M and B are constant, and if you are changing K, which is the spring constant, for some, for one spring A, it would be Ka. For another spring B, it would be Kb. So if Ka has lesser overshoots and Kb has a greater overshoots, then you can say that Ka is a good spring and Kb is a bad spring. Similarly, if the rise time of Ka is less and rise time of Kb is greater, you can say that or settling time is of Kb is greater and Ka is less. That you can say that the spring with the lesser settling time, lesser rise time is a good spring, and a spring with greater settling time or greater rise time is a bad spring. So from here you can decide what is good and what is bad depending upon the performance parameters, and those performance parameters uh, directly affect your this response of a system. Okay, so let's now discuss another important point. All this discussion that I have made is for second order system with a step input. This we already have discussed. Now what if I have a third order system? For example, I gave you a system in exam which is actually a third order system, and if you blindly apply all these formulas to a third order system, obviously your answers will be incorrect. So what to do with this third pole? How to get rid of this third pole? So that you are able to apply the formulas that you have recently learned. So for that we need to see the effect of a third pole on a second order system. What is the effect of a third pole on a second order system? Okay, pictorially it is like if I would try to explain it quickly. For example, you have two poles. One is this. One is this. This is minus 1 plus j omega. This is s. This is j omega. In S domain, this is minus 1 plus j omega. This is minus 1 minus j omega. These are the two poles, and obviously there are two poles, so the system is a second order system because the characteristic equation would be in S square for this to have two poles. So if there is a third pole, let's suppose over here, what would be its effect on a second order system? So if I pictorially tell you that this third pole, if this third pole is over here, and in another picture, if this third pole is over here, so what would be the difference? If this third pole is near to these poles, which are called as dominant poles, if this third pole is near to these dominant poles, then we cannot ignore this pole. This pole would have effect on the overall performance of a system, and we cannot say that uh, this system can be considered a second order, or we cannot apply the formulas which are derived for a second order system. But if this third pole is far away from these dominant poles, then we can ignore this third pole. But how much far away? How much far? For example, if you have a system with a transfer function where T of S is equal to 1 over S square plus 2 zeta omega ns plus omega n square, this is a second order system, and you have a gamma S plus 1 another pole attached to this second order system. So roots of this equation are for this roots are minus 1 over gamma, and for this the roots are, or I can say the real part. We will only discuss the real part, which is zeta omega n. In this example, the real part of these complex pole is minus 1. So similarly, the real part of this expression is zeta omega n. So I am not going into the detail of complex part of the poles of a second order system because they are of no use to us in this discussion. So if 1 over, I can say if this 1 over gamma, magnitude of 1 over gamma is greater than 10 times zeta omega n, magnitude of the zeta omega n, then I can ignore this pole. Uh, I mean to say that if it is minus 1, and if this pole is at minus 10, then forget about this pole. So if you are given with a system S cube plus something something something, a third order system, and uh, if you find the roots of this characteristic equation with S cube, and these are minus 1, minus 2, and minus 14, then forget about this minus 14. S plus 1, S plus 2, S plus 14. These are the three roots. Cancel this, ignore this, and evaluate the zeta and omega n for S plus 1 into S plus 2 only, which will be a second order equation. So if you are given with a third pole, if I give a question in exam which is actually a third order system, and I will put this third pole like 10 times away from the dominant pole, and if someone of you will blindly apply the formulas on the third order equation and without thinking about it, then obviously he will get zero credit about it. Although if he even if he will write correct formulas, correct calculation, he would still get zero credit for that because he will miss that conceptual point, uh, which is that he was unable to ignore that third pole due to the reason that it was far away from the dominant poles. By the way, in some books, you can have a read on a reference book as well. In few of your reference books, this 10 is actually 5. They say that if the third pole is 5 times far away from the real part of the dominant poles, then we can ignore that. So the two different books have written two different things. The obviously if it is 5 times away, effect will be lower, uh, but it would be better if we ignore it when it is 10 times away from your dominant poles. So in conclusion, if you have a pole at minus 1, if you have a two poles a pair of poles at minus 1 plus j omega, minus 1 minus j omega, whose real part is minus 1, and you have another pole which is at minus 10, then forget about this minus 10, ignore that minus 10, for make an equation with these two poles only, find zeta and omega n with that equation, and put those zeta and omega n into the formulas that we have written, and then to find the performance of that system. Okay, there is another question. What if we have an extra zero? Uh, Up till now, we have discussed that what would happen if I have a third pole in a second order system. Now, the next question is what would happen if I have an extra zero or uh, another zero in the system which wasn't evaluated earlier? Then, what would that zero, what would be the effect of that zero on the system? So, the quick answer is that system would not change the shape of the response. In case of third pole, if that third pole is near to the dominant poles, then it has the capability to change entire performance parameters. However, if that third pole is away from your dominant poles, then it has no effect on the performance parameters. But in case of extra zero, if your zero obviously, if your zero is away from your dominant pole, then again it would have a negligible effect. The farther the zero, the lesser is the effect of that system. Uh, but what actually is the effect of the zero? Can it change the performance parameter? Does it has the capability uh, to change the shape of the response of the system? No, it doesn't. It only changes the uh, size of the response. For example, if this is some response of the system, then with an extra zero, this response will only be everything in this response will be amplified. It would be an amplified version of the previous response. Just like if some response is multiplied with a gain factor k. However, in case of pole, it wasn't the case. When there was a pole can change the rise time, settling time, uh, peak time, percentage overshoots in a very different fashion. However, the zero only has a magnifying uh, effect on the system. How? If I try to explain it mathematically, let's say the C of S is your system's response. Adding a zero to the system response would be S plus A is some zero at minus A, multiply with the C of S, which was the original C of S was the original response. Adding a zero means multiplied with S plus A, where it means that you have added a zero at S is equal to minus A to the original system. So it means S into C of S plus A into C of S. So this is the S into C of S means S means derivative. S into C of S is the derivative term of the original response, and A is the basically scaled version. All S and A both contribute to magnitude. So S plus A is basically a constant term. S is the slope, obviously the derivative. So the slope has some numeric value, and a is the scalar term. So obviously it also should have a numeric value. So overall, the C of S is multiplied some numeric value, which we can say is a gain factor. So the response of your system will be would be like if it is magnified or if it is multiplied with a gain factor. Um, let's consider another case. If we have, what if we have 0 in positive half plane? In case of pole, if there is a pole in this area, you can straight away say that system is unstable. But what would happen if we have a 0 in the right half plane? So what we have discussed, that in case of pole, if we have a pole in the left half plane, then we can ignore that pole if it is 10 times farther than the dominant poles. And if we have a 0 in the left half plane, then this 0 would only contribute as a magnifying factor to your original response. And if there is a pole on the right half plane of your S plane, then you can say your system is an unstable system. But if what happens if you have a 0 in the right half plane, means this S plus A is now S minus A, and there is a 0 at S is equal to A. This is A, so which is actually a positive right half plane. So in that case, it would be like there would be a negative sign over here, S into C of S minus A into C of S. This is slope. This is some uh, scaled term multiplied with the C of S. Now, what does this expression means? This expression means that if this was the, sorry, okay, it has refused to be erased. If this was the original response of the system, let's say this was C of S. So this term denotes slope of C of S, and this term denotes the value of the C of S multiplied with some factor A. So for at this point, if at this point in time you have a larger slope is being reduced. That is why I was trying to erase, because the initially the slope is greater and eventually it is reduced. So this can be the actual response. This is not the case. So initially slope is greater, which is eventually reduced when you reach the peak value. So this is your, you can say, C of S, which is the response of the system. So what would happen when you add a pole in your right half plane? Initially, initially your value of C of S is low. This is the magnitude of C of S. You can say the magnitude of C of S. The value is initially low, the slope is high. Just consider this portion. In this portion, the magnitude of C of S is low, whereas the slope of C of S is high. the magnitude, this term is low and this term is high. So you can say that initially it will follow the term with the slope. This is a positive term, this is a negative term. So slope is greater, this is smaller, so overall result is positive. So initially overall result is positive. However, even gradually slope is decreasing whereas the magnitude is increasing. So there will be a time when these both terms would be equal because slope is gradually decreasing and the magnitude of C of S, this is the slope of C of S, this is magnitude of C of S, is gradually increasing. So when there is a point, for example, let's say at this point the magnitude of C of S is this and the slope of C of S is lesser as compared to this one. The magnitude of C of S is increased, the slope of C of S is decreased. So the slope of C of S minus A into magnitude. Now this term seems to be a bigger term because this is a magnitude, this at this point this is the magnitude, and A multiplied a scalar term multiplied with this magnitude seems to be a bigger than the slope value, which is now lesser than the slope which was here. So there will be a time when this term will be greater than this term, then the response will become negative and eventually it will end up like this. So this happens when your pole when your zero is on the right half plane. If we invert the input, for example, if input was 1 over s, if we make it minus 1 over s, then our response would be like this. Response will also be inverted. This is inverted version of this response. In this case, input is, you can say, input is reversed, or we have taken negative of input. When input, for example, if input over here, step input over here was 1 over s, then we can consider that if we have applied minus 1 over s over here, then response would be of this shape. All this happens when you have a pole on the, when you have a zero on the right hand side. You have a pole on the, by the way, it hasn't become unstable. If you have a zero on the pole on the right hand side, the system would have been an unstable system. But here, in case of zero, an extra zero on the right hand side, the system isn't unstable, but its response will look like this one. So another last thing of our lecture is, of our today's lecture is estimation of damping ratio. Up till now, we only know how to find damping ratio. The only procedure that we know to find damping ratio is that we compare our characteristic equation with the standard equation, which is s square plus 2 zeta omega ns plus omega n square, and from comparison we can find omega n and zeta. But what if someone says to you that you are given with the response of a system and tell me the zeta only by looking at this response. So there is a way where you can estimate the response of a system only by the damping ratio of the system only by looking at the response of the system. That if the system is this response, okay, its damping ratio would be somewhere around this, without even going to the calculations, without even comparing it with the standard equation, because up till now you only know the standard equation of second order system. If you have a greater order system and someone asks you to find the uh, zeta or the damping ratio of that greater order system, then obviously you would be required to need to know the standard equation of that greater order system, which obviously you don't know. So is there any method by which we can estimate? I'm not saying that that would be the actual value of the damping ratio. That would always be an estimate. By looking at the response of the system, you can estimate the value of the damping ratio. How? It's a very, you can say, a very small derivation. What we have already written about the second, that derivation, by the way, will also be the basis of this derivation is also this equation, just for your information. So what we know that omega is equal to omega n into 1 minus zeta square, where 1 minus zeta square can be called as beta in our previous discussions. And we also know that frequency is equal to the number of cycles per second, just by the basic definitions you know about the frequency, which is basically omega over 2 pi and 2 3 and time constant for this exponential type of response is tau is equal to 1 over zeta omega, and this is information that is given to derive what we want to derive, what we want to know. Uh, we want to estimate the damping ratio by only by looking at the response of the system. Now, number of cycles in one time constant. Number of cycles in one time constant is equal to cycles per second multiplied by time constant tau, which is tau. What is the cycle per second? Cycle per second is omega over 2 pi, and what is tau? Tau is 1 over zeta omega n, so it is equal to omega over 2 pi zeta omega n, which is equal to omega n beta over 2 pi zeta omega n is equal to beta over 2 pi zeta. Now if response decays in n time constant, then cycles visible to you, cycles visible in this time response would be equal to n beta over 2 pi zeta. Normally for a second, now this n is variable. This n is variable. Normally, for a second order system, the response decays normally in four time constants. After four time constants, the response is being decayed. So I can write n is equal to 4 for second order system. So if I write n is equal to 4, then number of cycles visible would be 4 beta over 2 pi zeta. By putting in the value of beta, sorry, I can write 4 into 1 minus zeta square under root divided by 2 pi zeta. Now you can see what is this equation. On the left hand side of the equation you have cycles visible, and on the right hand side you have an equation with only one variable, which is zeta. So if you are given with a response of the system and someone asks you what is the zeta, you will say that for this typical response, for this response that I have drawn, how many cycles are visible. If I say one cycle, two cycle, 2.5, I can say that 2.5 cycles are visible over here. So if 2.5 cycles are visible, by the way, I believe that you already know that this is one cycle. So if 2.5 cycles are visible, then I can write it 2.5 is equal to 4 into 1 minus zeta square divided by 2 pi zeta. So in this equation, zeta is the only variable. So just by looking at this time response, you can find the value of zeta without going into the comparisons, without going into the finding the characteristic equation. For example, if you are not given with the characteristic equation, and finding the characteristic equation means that you have to find the transfer function of the system. So you have to go all the way from scratch, making a mathematical model, finding the transfer function of the system, and from transfer function you will write the denominator. From denominator you will write the characteristic equation of the system. You will then solve the characteristic equation of your system, compare it with the standard equation, and then you will find the zeta. This is a long process. So this long process is being bypassed with the help of this simpler equation. Obviously, this is not a the value that it will give you will not be a precise value. It will only be an estimation of the damping ratio. By the way, the importance of the important thing about the damping ratio is you only need to know about the range of the damping ratio. In the previous lecture or in the lab session that you have already done, you might have seen that if your zeta is 0 to 1, less than 0, equal to 1, less than 1, then the range of the zeta is important. So if you are estimating the damping ratio, by this estimation you can know about the range, then obviously you can estimate the type of response of the system as well, either it is over damped, under damped, or critically damped system, based on the range in which the zeta which you have evaluated lies. So I hope you should have got the point what I was trying to make. And one last thing that I would be discussing is, I think it was in this book. This is Norman Nice. Yeah, this is Dorf. Yes. This figure 5.17 is a very interesting figure. It gives impulse response of various root locations in S-plane. For example, it gives response of the system when root is over here, when pole is, sorry, it's the same by the way. When the pole is over here, when the pole is over here, when the pole is over here, pole is over. Now you can see, you can move the pole to any location by changing the zeta. You can move the pole to any location by changing the zeta. And you can change the zeta by changing the system parameters. Just as we change the zeta of your mass spring system by changing B, K, and M. So you can see that moving from Okay, moving, if there is a pole over here and over here, and there is another pole over here, then moving from right to left, you can see that number of ripples are reduced. System's settling time is reduced. It has a larger settling time, it has a smaller settling time. However, it has larger overshoot, it has a smaller overshoot. So if you are moving pole from right to left, then you are basically reducing the overshoots. Reducing the overshoot eventually reduces the settling time. Here, overshoots are greater and settling time is obviously, if there is a larger overshoot, then system will settle in larger time. So your system will have a greater settling time. If you can see that here there is a growing exponential response of the system, which shows that if your pole lies in the right half plane, the system is unstable. Its response will be ever growing, exponentially growing time response. And if you have a pole on this imaginary axis, on this j omega axis, then your system response will be oscillatory. Your system response will be oscillatory. For a pole in the right half plane, you have an unstable system. For pole on the imaginary axis, you have an oscillatory response. And if you move from top to bottom, if you move from top to bottom, sorry, from origin to top, if you move from origin to top in the direction of j omega axis, you can see that ripples increase. Ripples increase when you move from origin to the j omega axis, and if you move from origin to left, ripples are decreasing, or you can say that overshoots. The thing that we should observe is that the overshoot is decreasing and settling time is decreasing. There is no difference in settling time in moving from origin to above on the j omega axis. So if you have a pole over here and someone asks that your system is too slow, design a system that should settle quickly, then you should know what you have to do. You have to reduce the settling time. Then to reduce the settling time, you have to place this pole over here rather than at this point. So to place the pole over here, you should change zeta accordingly. To change the zeta, you have to change B, K, M or any system parameters. So this is critically important when you design some system, when you are in a position to design any system and you are in a driving position to observe the performance of the system. If you have designed a system whose poles lie in a right half plane, then you can see what will happen to your system. But if you have designed a system whose pole lie in the left half plane, then obviously that system would have been a better system. So guys, I think that's all from today. I will see you in next lecture. In case of any query, you can email me at rafe.chuktai@uit.edu.pk. So see you soon, inshallah. Allah Hafiz.